Today I want to talk about an item of food that I've had a tremendous amount of experience with, and that is instant ramen noodles. No, I don't get fancy with the noodles themselves or the broth. Instead, I get fancy with the toppings. And since I've tried so many different kinds, I'd like to talk about some of my favorites and why some of the more commonly known favorites aren't mine as well. Hey, XenPuck here. So now, part of how I was able to save more than 75% of my income is just that I'm not that fancy when it comes to food, right? I can make like 2 entrees of Chinese American takeout last for a week. Same idea with rotisserie chicken from any supermarket. Maybe that's one family meal for a family, but to me, that's worth 4 or 5 meals, if not more, right? But one of my all-time favorite is, of course, you guessed it, good old simple instant ramen, okay? Now, I get that these days I can afford to buy real noodles, but honestly, why bother, okay? That would just triple the cooking time, at the very least. And half the point of instant ramen noodles is to get a lovely meal out real quick, right? First, some context, right? I don't particularly care about the noodles. I do buy lots of different kinds of instant noodles just for the sake of variety in terms of the flavor packet. But personally, I want to make it clear that I almost never use most or even half of the flavor packets. And that's just because I put so much toppings into the noodle soups that you don't really need these chemically flavored type of packets to dominate the taste. I mean, don't get me wrong. I still love me some hot flavors here and there, but you can get that with your own condiments, if not from the toppings, right? Also, to me, it doesn't really matter what type of noodles it is, right? I like having a variety in terms of the noodles as well, but to me, in the instant ramen that I make, the noodles are one of the least important things. Right? They're just there to make it feel like a real noodle soup, right? Again, I'm putting so much stuff in these noodle soups that it's practically just a soup, right? So now let's consider what toppings that you might want. First, I'll name some common ones that I do agree with, then some common ingredients that I disagree with, and finally some weird picks, or at least that it is. They're weird according to me, right? Number 1, toppings everyone like and that I do agree with. Well, number 1, is the boiled egg of some sort, right? Soft boiled egg, ideally. You can marinate these to make them into real, like ramen egg styles or tea egg styles, depending on personal preference. Personally, when I make these on the stove, instead of like via cup of noodles with boiling water, on the stove I do a poached egg, right? Reminds me of egg drop soup a little bit. It's really good, right? Of course, another one that I agree with is some kind of meat, right? Common ones are already cooked meat, like anything from leftovers, right? From takeout. Meatballs or hot dogs, kielbasa, they all work, right? My favorite, and I'm not actually sure how unusual this is actually just my own baked ribs or barbecue ribs if I have some of those left over. Soaking the bone also makes me feel like I'm being all authentic when it comes to like that bone, like brothiness, even though I said the broth isn't that important to me, right? Now, I know for traditional ramen people, they want to use like roast pork, but I almost never have that on hand. I think it's really easy to substitute. It's really pork or beef that has some sort of fatty bits to it. Chicken's fine too, but if I'm doing chicken, I really want the bone-in kind, right? Ideally like a piece of roasted drumstick, right? And finally, the ingredients that I do agree with that's common in most ramen is seaweed, right? This is a classic addition for some extra umami. I personally like putting some broken sheets of dried seaweed just because it makes the ramen also look interesting. It's pretty easy to find, I think, and it stores for a long time in the fridge, so it's ideal. And if I have it, I almost always add this, right? Okay. Second section. Toppings that I see everywhere, but I don't tend to use. Not to say that I would never use them, just not my preference, right? So one in this subset, which is corn kernels. Okay, I feel like corn looks great on top of ramen when you go out to a real ramen shop, but it has several issues. One, it's hard to come back in terms of kernels unless you're doing frozen stuff, and I almost never use any frozen food. 2, the corn tends to sink to the bottom of the bowl, making each slurp of ramen very uneven to me. At least for me, I always tend to end up fishing corn out of the bottom of the bowl at the same time at the end of the meal, so that's not great for proportionality. And finally, corn is like sweet on the sweet side. I like sweet, but I think of ramen noodles as like a savory treat. So I would take a corn on the cob on the side if available. No need to combine sweet and savory together. That's how I feel. If you feel differently, by all means do you, but please tell me where you would get a consistent source of non-frozen corn kernels. I would love to know that, right? Second common items that other people like that I don't, bean sprouts. These are okay. Mainly, I just don't know what to do with bean sprouts except put them in ramen. So to me, they're like a one-trick pony, and they don't taste like anything by themselves, right? To me, they actually reminded me of like iceberg lettuce and salad, in the sense that they're just filler. So I mostly skip. They're just way more of other types of ingredients that I would like to put in, right? Another common ingredients that I don't like. Butter. I know some ramen calls for butter. Who doesn't like butter, right? I like butter. I love butter, actually. However, I almost never put butter in my ramen soups. This is because I always have leftover meat of one kind or another, and they render a lot of fat, right? Like from ribs or carnitas or steaks, parts of a steak that don't really work well, as a steak, like a medium rare steak, but renders wonderfully in a soup, right, with fatty bits. So I would rather always use actual animal fat rather than butter, right? If I was ever out of the animal fat, would I use butter? Sure, I guess, right? And finally, an ingredient other people like to put in ramen that I don't, which is cheese. Oh my god, why do this, right? I love cheese, but it doesn't belong in a noodle soup because it messes up the consistency, I think, okay? I think this is way worse than combining sweet and savory, because this is combining like liquid and solid. That's blasphemy to my taste bud. Totally weird, skip. Okay, section 3. Finally, we're moving on to the toppings that I rarely see, but I like. This, to me, is the fun part, right? First pick spinach, okay? I never see anyone talk about spinach in ramen shop menus, but I think it's great, right? The only issue here is that you have to put a lot of it into the pot and very late to the game when it's almost ready, or the spinach will just shrivel up into nothingness, so you can barely recognize it. And I also know this is a real personal choice because some people just don't like the mouthfeel or that tenon-ish taste of spinach. But I like it, and I think this veggie is really easy to find, and I almost always have it around, so I put them in there when I can, right? Second pick, Brussels sprouts. Okay, this is on the other end of the vegetable spectrum in terms of durability. I toss these in there as soon as I put it in water, because the thing about Brussels sprouts is you could cook this for like 10 minutes and it would still feel like a substantial thing, right? I like this similar to spinach. It gives the noodle soup a little bit of a bitterness that counters the hotness of the flavor packets that I like. But also, both vegetables serves a function of absorbing oil and fat from the meats I use, right? Next pick, laogama. Okay, this is a chili crisp. It's becoming really popular, so I don't know if this is a weird pick still. It's a chili crisp / hot sauce. I really love it. It's got fermented beans in there or whatnot, and it doesn't taste chemically like flavor packets. So once I've found out about this chili crisp in a jar, I've been putting in a spoonful every single time, right? Now next pick, fish balls. Now these are really just a kind of a Chinese version of processed fish products, similar to, I forget what they're called in Japanese, but basically what Naruto from the series Naruto likes. Those are just fish balls, the little swirl things, right? Never bothered to try to find the Japanese type of fish balls, but I can find the Chinese versions really easy. They're cheap, they have a very, very slight, subtle, fishy taste, and also provides a great layer of contrasting texture to the whole combination of a noodle soup. So I always add this if I have it. Oh my god, I can't stop talking about ingredients once I start dreaming about my new ramen soups. So one last one, cherry tomatoes. Okay, these are actually probably the sweetest ingredients that I put into my ramen soup. To me, they're more tart than sweet. Again, I think this works really well in contrast to the oily meats that I use, right? Not sure why these aren't super popular in terms of ramen toppings. In a pinch, if you don't have these, you could just sub it in for a little bit of ketchup, right? Even though, remember, ketchup brings its own oil content, right? Ah, man. In conclusion, I mean, ramen's been on my mind simply because I can't make that many different kind of foods while our house is being renovated, so we don't have a functioning kitchen, right? Almost everything I've mentioned here, today can easily be placed in a bowl along with some instant ramen, and then you just pour some boiling water, cover the bowl, and about 5 to 6 minutes later, a perfectly good meal is done, right? I mean, I don't actually have all the stuff that I talked about at any given moment, but honestly, one meat, one veggie, an egg, and some type of sauce, along with some of the flavor packet, would make a perfect fine, perfectly fine combination, right? And because the number of toppings is basically endless, the possibilities, the combinations are also even exponentially larger, right? So what do you guys like in your instant ramen soups? Please let me know in the comments below. Subscribe and like and all that stuff. I would love to be inspired. Cheers.